we have been looking together at the nature of Jesus. In fact, as we've looked at it, you've memorized some things, haven't you? Surely you have. Let's test and see. As you look at the nature of Jesus, I heard someone shout out the first one, which was servant, yes, or slave. And the second one was not lord it over others. You're doing great. And the third was leadership by example. Exactly. And number 4 was humble. Excellent. And number 5 was as a child. Number 6 was as the younger. And number 7 was last. Number 8 as the least. I hear you calling it out. That's great. Then we moved, these were in the Gospels, we moved to Philippians chapter 2 and added 6 more. The first of those was no force. He did not use force on us. And then no blind ambition. And then he made himself of no reputation, yes, or no image, or he emptied himself and made himself nothing. And then next in our list was human. He was fully God, fully man. And the next one was obedient, even unto death. And that's number 14, and completes the list. Death tends to, doesn't it? Now, when we look at this, though, I must say to you, and you probably have already detected this, there are some problems that go with this. There are. And I need to be honest with you and tell you what they are. One of them is when you really try to be a servant-hearted, other-centered person, people can take advantage of you. They can say, oh, you're a slave. Well, I've always wanted one. Well, is that what I'm talking about? No, it isn't. Let me draw you a little chart here in a way. There is a distinct difference between servanthood, and I know I'm sort of playing with words here, but it works. Stick with me. Is not equal to. Do you understand that old mathematical symbol? Is not equal to, not the same as servitude. Servitude is when you have been forced. Servanthood is when you choose. There is a distinct difference. In fact, Jesus said, no man takes my life from me. You see, that would be force. He says, I lay it down of myself or of my choice or my accord. Let's write my choice here. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my choice. Paul tells us, he says, I am free of all men, or I am a slave to no man, or I have been enslaved by no one. So let's write the word enslaved over here. So he says, since I am free of all men, or I've been enslaved by no one, he says, I make myself a slave to all men, that I might win some. So do you see the difference? This is force. This is choice. Misery is over on the force or servitude side. Joy is on the choice or servanthood side. Now, what I've discovered is that if you live over on this side, the forced or servitude side, 1 week of that and you're ready for a 9 or 10 year sabbatical, you know. You get into an area known as burnout. Have you ever heard of that before? It was a hot subject just a few years ago. It's a very real topic, though. Anytime you're living on this side, the forced or servitude or takes or enslaved side, you're a candidate for burnout very, very rapidly. Living over here, here, though, you can go through anything. And it doesn't wear you out. Oh, you get tired. I have had people ask me, do you really believe you can work too hard for the Lord? And I think the answer is no, you can't. If you really love what you're doing, then you get tired and you rest. But then you can't wait to get back at it. But if you live over on the servitude side, you get weary and heavy laden, burdened down. And you think, look, I've done my time. Let someone else do it now for a change. But when you are making choices for the Lord, then it is exciting. You can't wait to get to the next item to work for Him. How in the world did Paul do all the things that he did? Have you ever thought about that? It's incredible. Everywhere he went, he says, everywhere I go, I know they're going to whip me, they're going to stone me, they're going to throw me in jail. But he says, that doesn't move me. I glory in it, And I think, what is he, a pervert? No, he's just living on the servanthood side. He has chosen this, and he makes these awesome statements about the future. He says the sufferings of this life aren't even worthy to be compared with what he has waiting on us, you see. This is the beautiful thing about living on the servanthood side. How in the world could Jesus have done the things that he did? The things he did, there was not enough paper and ink to write them all down. Only because for the joy set before him, they said, this was no big thing. Big deal, I can put up with this. He had chosen, you see. If you live on the other side, it's misery. I have a number of friends who are surfers. I have never met a burnt-out surfer. I have never met a surfer who said, I hope I never see another wave as long as I live. No. They can be on their deathbed and someone yells, surf's up, I'm coming. That's the difference, and that's the joy of living on the choosing side. Now, how did Jesus face manipulation? Being the perfect servant, you know that there would have been attempts made to manipulate Jesus, and that's true, there were. And there are a couple of basic ways that he dealt with those who would attempt to manipulate, those who would attempt to take advantage of him. One of them we find in the 3rd chapter of John. Right at the very beginning, a man named Nicodemus comes to him by night. Now, that's a significant thing, that he came by night. That in itself is patronistic. It's saying, well, I know you're a good man, but you're not safe to be seen with during the day, so I'll just sneak in here because I don't want you to hurt my reputation. That's really what he's saying. So Nicodemus comes by night, and he says to Jesus, we know that you're a man come from God. I love this. Teacher, come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. Awesome. Now, if you were to say that to me, Gayle, we know you're a teacher come from God, because no man can teach these things except God be with him. If you were to say that to me, you'd have me. I'd say, yeah, I guess you're right. What else have you noticed about me? But now Jesus was not fooled by this, and I am so amazed that I'm convinced that Jesus had what I call some flags on trip hammers in his mind. When certain things happened, these flags would fly up, boing, 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 and a flag would fly up and say, watch this man real close. This is probably manipulation. And so here comes Nicodemus, and he's laying a very flattering statement on him. Oh, teacher, we know you're come from God, because no man can do these things unless God is with him. Flattery is a form of manipulation, isn't it? If someone comes and says, oh, you're just the sweetest thing I've ever seen. I know I only met you 5 minutes ago, but I don't think there's anybody in the whole world sweeter than you. Oh, you're just so wonderful. Immediately you should have a flag that goes boing, 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 boing. So he's actually flattering Jesus. And Jesus, an interesting thing here, Jesus did not need to have Nicodemus tell him this. Now that's very important, because I've discovered that if there's any area that I need to have someone tell me, it becomes an area that I can be gotten into bondage, where I can become bound. Jesus did not need Nicodemus to tell him, we know you're a teacher come from God. He already knew that. He did not need him to tell him, no man can do these things except God be with him. He already knew that, you see. So when you need someone to tell you something, you're in deep trouble. Somehow you can go into bondage over it. So Nicodemus tells him this. Now, what was Jesus' response? It was not the same kind of response that I would give. It's amazing to me when you stop and think what a strange conversation this was. We know you're a man come from God. No man can do these things except God be with him. And Jesus says, I assuredly tell you, you've got to be born again. That's quite a conversation. I mean, it's not your average conversation. Now, the reason I believe Nicodemus was being manipulative was because Nicodemus didn't even believe his own words. If he had believed his own words, he would have said, tell me how. But instead, he wants to argue with Jesus. Wait a minute here. You expect me to go back in my mother's womb and be what he did? And Jesus gets on his case and he says, you're a teacher of Israel and you don't know these things? I mean, how can I explain this? So here Jesus met this manipulativeness of Nicodemus with confrontation. That wasn't the only time where Jesus confronted a manipulator. In the 20th chapter of Luke, well, it's actually in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I'll just read this to you. And they asked him, saying, Teacher. Now, by the way, they had sent spies or had sent someone else, the Pharisees especially, had sent spies. The Herodians were involved in this too, because he had silenced the Sadducees, actually. And they asked him, saying, Teacher, this is verse 21 of Luke 20, we know that you say and teach rightly, and you do not show personal favoritism, but teach the way of God truly. Isn't that beautiful? We know you're a brave man. We know that you're not afraid of anyone. You teach only the truth. Now, folks, if you were to say that to me, you'd have me. Gayle, you're a brave teacher. You only teach the truth. You're not afraid of anybody. I'd say, yeah, I'm pretty tough. That's right. That's right. You'd have me. But Jesus, I believe, something had hit the trip hammer and boing, 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 the flag flew up and he's saying to himself, watch this man very closely. The Bible says he knew the intent of their heart. And then they said, can we ask you a question? Now, if you were to say these words to me and then say to me, can I ask you a question? Look, I'm going to answer it whether I know the answer or not. You will have tapped my messianic complex. And I'll think, oh yes, since I'm such a good teacher, I'll certainly have an answer for this. You can count on it. And then they asked him the question, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Uh-oh. Tough question. Now, if you were to ask me that question after having tapped my messianic complex, Gayle, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Oh, I would begin to sweat. I would know this is a difficult one. Oh, my ministry is on the line. But I know how to handle questions like that. I do. It's called muddy the water. And I would tend to answer it something like this. Well, let me see. When you go back to some of the ancient times, the very beginning of history, when mankind really didn't have what might be called a governmental form of system, so forth, and therefore taxation wasn't really the ultimate thing at that particular point. You could have this sort of thing go on, and you could have that. Then you would come later on when you have what sort of a monarchical system. You see, in the monarchical system, in order to protect the people, you'd have to levy some sort of fee and so forth. And then when you get to the time in which mankind considers himself to be the king, and those who govern by the will of the people and so forth, then you can do this and you can do that.